listening to the Mark Bradford Alchemy for Life podcast.
They can't all be right. Well, hey there. Welcome back. I was recently on a social media conversation. That in and of itself sounds a bit foreboding, doesn't it? But no, it wasn't an argument or anything like that. I don't do those. But it was a conversation about writing. I try not to get too involved into conversations in general about certain crafts and things. And I wonder if others are like this too, because by definition, if you feel like I do, then you'd be invisible to me, and I'm invisible to you. In other words, if a bunch of people get together to commiserate about things, and you're not one of those people who gets together to commiserate, we wouldn't know you exist. For example, let's go back to writing, or let's take painting to make it even more objective. If you're an artist and you create paintings and things like that, would you find yourself sitting down with people and saying, yeah, when I put a lot of red in, I really have a problem with that because of the contrast of this and, the trinary color, this, that, and the other thing? Or would you kind of keep that close to your coat and go, well, I don't know, it's not something I talk about, or perhaps it's something that you figured out that it seems like a lot of people haven't. I think it's one thing to get together with people, especially like if you're an indie painter, right? Like you haven't been picked up, you don't have a gallery or sponsor or anything, right? So you could get together with other artists and you could sort of commiserate and compare notes and go, well, how do you get picked up for a gallery? How does this work and that work? Or where's the best place to buy canvas and stuff like that? Those are the conversations that I think are very helpful for people in a group to have, especially creatives. But those aren't the conversations I'm talking about. I'm talking about actually focusing on the craft, in which sometimes people like to talk about it and some people don't. And it doesn't surprise me when I look and I see people who are very successful, and it seems like quietly in the night, they were successful. And they were not the kind of people who go on to Twitter or some other media and constantly talk about it. So that is kind of a flag for me to begin with, right? And I think I'm of the group that just goes and does it. And if somebody asks for help, or, obviously through this podcast, I try to help people in little digestible bites. But I don't want to have hours and hour-long conversations with people about things that I think I've kind of figured out, because that's called consulting, and one is typically paid for that. So in this particular conversation, someone was talking about how they were like creating this mantra that it's not going to be right the first time. It's not going to be right the first time. And this is something I've talked about before. So if you enjoy writing, you may want to pay attention here, because this is one of those times where I'm going to tell you not to beat yourself up, but I'm going to tell you how not to beat yourself up. So my advice was, in the tiny amount of characters I was limited to, was simply, instead of saying, yeah, it's not going to work, the first time's always going to be bad, the first time's always going to be bad, it's not. So my advice is, there's a way to kind of manage and curate your flow of creativity so that it comes out pretty good the first time. And I understand if you sat somebody in the room, even the greatest author that you think is the greatest author, and said, here, write this, and they wrote and I said, no, I got the gun loaded, keep going. They have all sorts of mistakes, and it's maybe a plot issue and this, that, and the other thing. And they go back and go, oh, I have to change this because I forgot I mentioned it 3 chapters ago. Yeah, that's normal. But what I'm talking about is just sort of vomiting your work onto the canvas or onto something else because you know that, well, it's always going to be crappy the first time. We wouldn't have Olympic level athletes if that was true. I mean, they'd get up, you couldn't run around the block without falling then. Like, you'd run around the block and you'd get really good at running. And then you'd go and run around the block again and go, oh, I stumbled and I fell in the gutter again. Well, the first time's going to be crappy. Does that sound less than smart to you? Of course it does. We build on the skill that we created before. We build and we build and we build. And everyone says that, that's just like a muscle. That's like a muscle. This is this. You just have to exercise it. And that's true. It really is true. You keep doing something over and over again, you're going to get better at it. And if you're doing something over and over again, and every single time it's the crappy version the first time, something's wrong. And I would say to you, it's not your skill level. It's something that you're doing to mess with yourself. Because there's no way you can do something over and over and over again and enjoy it and finally have a good product and go, well, the first time it's always bad. I don't have to bombard you with analogies, but I could go to anything from cake decorating to gymnastics to driving a car. Oh, well, the first time's always crappy. I usually hit a tree or a dog or a grandmother on the way to the store. The first time... Does that make sense to you? I made myself laugh. So my point was that there's a way to manage your creativity. And I know it's a mystical thing, but there's so many authors, and I presume also people who are painters and musicians and other people out there, that if they think that, they are doing themselves such a disservice. How do you ever expect to gain confidence and gain control over your craft or the thing that you do or the thing that you produce if you don't try to build on it and go, this first time is going to be pretty darn good? And maybe I've been lucky in some ways that I got that early on, because a lot of times I hit the ground running on a number of things. And the first time was like really good. And I was like, okay. I thought this was supposed to be hard. And it was hard. It was a huge amount of work, but I enjoyed it and I stuck with it. As a side note, I do have a new nonfiction coming out that actually gets really deep into that phrase I just said, really deep into the last few sentences. So look for that when it comes out. But in the meantime, in our little tiny 10-minute podcast, if you're creative and you have done this, and like the last 10 things you've created is always crappy, and then you somehow fix it, I want you to contact me. Because you're like some kind of magical, you're like Bigfoot. Like, I can't imagine a person like that exists, who is successful in what they do, but every single time they start, it's crappy. I just see this as one of the biggest plagues in the field of writing and being a storyteller, or trying to get an idea out concisely and effectively. This belief that the first time is going to be that way and we just need to get it out of ourselves. It shouldn't be a chore. You should be there doing the creative thing you're doing. Scrapbooking, writing, training for a marathon, doing a marathon, running, painting, sculpting, being a potter, building, construction, design, 3D printing, cooking. If it's something you've done before, the first time should not be crappy. Did that make sense? Because I said first time and you've done it before? I mean, you've done it 6 times, and the 7th time you do it, it starts out the same and it's just as bad. Like you're not making Cherry's Jubilee and yet it's on fire again. Really? And again, just to be clear, if you're somebody who has tried cooking 7 times and you suck at it every single time, well, that's different. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about an inability to learn a skill. I'm talking about a skill that you think you've learned pretty well, but for some reason you have a belief system that the first time you do it, or the first time you do it again, or when you start again, the start sucks. Well, there's something you need to fix. There's something in your way. So, again, if somehow the description of Bigfoot type individual fits you and you can prove it, I would love to talk to you. Otherwise, knock it off. Say that right now. Knock it off. Stop hiding behind that. Get better. And don't beat yourself up because it's not perfect the first time, but you should beat yourself up if it sucks every single time. Come on, people. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be harsh this time. I'm even shaking my finger at you. Isn't that horrible? So, I hope you took this with a grain of salt or sand or candy or whatever. It helps the medicine go down. All right, I'm done. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. You matter to me. And I always enjoy your feedback. Take care. Thank you for listening. I love your feedback as always. Keep it coming. I always appreciate if you like, share, subscribe, and all that nonsense. And if you don't, that's cool too. By now, my new novella, The Devil's in the Details, has hit the shelves. If you like a smoldering, quick read, then you may love reading The Devil's in the Details. Check it out.